Welcome to another episode of Mike's Money Picks. Today on the podcast, we're going to be breaking down the Friday, March 1st slate of college basketball DFS for DraftKings. Y'all, it is officially the month of March, which has me really excited because it means that the NCAA tournament, March Madness, is right around the corner, and I could not be more excited about it. We've been with you all college basketball season, breaking out all these college basketball DFS slates, and the big ones are going to start coming in about 2 weeks when conference championship starts, and then the NCAA tournament the week after that. So if you have not already, go ahead and subscribe to the channel and subscribe to the audio feed. That way you can be notified when new episodes drop, and we're going to be with you through the rest of the college basketball season. So if you get subscribed, you will get all those episodes straight to you and you won't miss one. Now, what we have here on this Friday, this is a true mid-major Friday slate. We have two games in the Mountain West that have a little bit of blowout potential. We have a game in the MAC, which is kind of for first place. And then we have a very pivotal game in the A10 as the regular season winds down in all these mid-major conferences. So what we're going to do here on this episode is we're going to break down all four games and tell you how you can expect each game to play out and how that will play a factor into who you do and don't want in your DraftKings lineups here on this Friday slate. All right, so the first game on the slate is a clash in the MAC game number one, Fairfield and Marist. Fairfield is currently sitting as the projected regular season winner of the MAC, so they need this one to kind of finish the season off strong and make sure they get the one seed in that conference tournament. But I got to say, this is a game where, I truly don't know how DraftKings decided to put this game on the slate as opposed to some of the other ones that are taking place on Friday night. Like there's, some games in the Sun Belt that could have been on here, but, they decided to choose this one. I don't know why. I'm not complaining because I tend to like, bigger slates as opposed to smaller ones, but I just don't know why this particular game made it. And that's no disrespect to Fairfield or Marist, but these are two teams that haven't really been on the slates all season long. So this game is projected to be 69 to 67 in favor of Marist. This makes it the lowest total on the entire slate. Now, these are two teams that we don't see very often, right? So let's get to know them just a little bit. Fairfield ranks 127th in offensive efficiency, 239th in defensive efficiency, and 140th in tempo, according to KenPom. Marist ranks 315th in offensive efficiency. Not a good offensive team, but they're better on defense. They're 82nd in defensive efficiency and 312th in tempo. This is a rematch of a previous meeting earlier this season where Fairfield won 82 to 61. Now, in that game, Fairfield had a ceiling game from Caleb Fields. He is the leader in shot rate on the team. And in that game, he absolutely went off from three. He was able to go 10 for 18 from behind the arc to put up 33 total points, 51 fantasy points, which was his high for the entire season. And he's usually third on the team in shot rate, not first. I misread my note there. And he has actually shown a legitimate ceiling, though, aside from that game. He's had three other games where he was over 40 fantasy points in conference play. So he is a guy who's going to get a decent amount of shots. Is it likely he's going to get 18 three-point shots again? Not really. What ended up happening in that game was it was a little bit of a blowout with Fairfield winning by 21 points. And Caleb Fields was the starter that was kind of in the whole time. So he was kind of padding his own stats at the end, but ended up with 38 minutes played, 18 shots. And again, he's not likely to get that same outcome again, but the ceiling is legitimately there. Now, Jalen Leach is this team's leader in usage. And he's been over 40 fantasy points 5 times in conference play. He's got a legitimately high ceiling. But, the first game against Marist, he only had 16 fantasy points. The problem is with Leach is he needs to play a full game, right? Like he needs the game to be pretty close. He needs to get a lot of shot attempts, a lot of rebounds and assists as well, because, he does average 4 rebounds and 3 assists per game. So he is a little bit dependent on peripheral stats. But he just needs everything to go right to have a ceiling game. And, with this being a pretty low total and Marist being a team that plays really slow tempo, really good defense, not exactly the recipe for a ceiling game there out of Jalen Leach. Now, Jasper Floyd is 4th on the team in usage, but he picks up so many peripheral stats that he can hit value anyway. In that first game against Marist, he put up 22 fantasy points on 7, 6, and 4, but he only played 25 minutes. He's a guy that when he plays a ton of minutes, he really gets a lot of peripherals, averaging over 6 rebounds and over 4.5 assists per game and over 2.5 steals a game. So if he's able to play a full minute load and, no matter what the game environment is, I think he'll still be a chance to hit value just because of, he can get you fantasy points in a variety of different ways. If you look at his last 4 games, he's hit 4x value in 3 of them, and it's been totally different game environments. He had 30 fantasy points in a game that featured 128 points, and then had 38 fantasy points in a game that featured 174 points. So he just has a lot of variety of getting there. I would consider him the safest cash game play on this Fairfield side. Now, after those three, they're kind of the big three for this team. Bryson Goodine is fourth in the team in minutes, but he actually comes off the bench. He owns the highest shot rate on this team. So when he is in the game, he is out there to score. And he's been over 21 fantasy points in 7 of the last 8 games. I think that makes him a very, very solid value play on this Fairfield side. In the original game against Marist, he played 27 minutes, took 8 shots, and put up 27 fantasy points. That's about par for the course from what you can expect out of Goodine. So I think he's a really solid play at $5,100, and on a slate that doesn't have a whole lot of value, he feels like a pretty safe value play. Now, after him, Bleachmore is their fifth minutes guy on the team, and he's actually their primary forward. He's listed as guard/forward on DraftKings, but the problem is he does not score a lot of fantasy points. He's only hit 4x value twice in this calendar year, which is not a great sign considering we're in March 1st now. So not my favorite option at 5,100. I would way rather just play Goodine, who plays with a higher shot rate, plays with a higher usage rate, and plays more minutes. Now, Yetna and Sek are the two guys that will split minutes at the 5 for this team. But the problem is the fact that they're splitting minutes kind of decreases their overall ceiling. And is there a chance that one of them has a ceiling game? Yeah, but it's not really likely to come against a Mariners team that plays at a slow tempo and plays pretty good defense. I would not stack those two guys together, in my personal opinion. Now, Peyton Smith is an interesting one because he was this team's starting center prior to getting injured in a game at the start of February against Iona. He missed a few games and has played 4 games since. And in those 4 games, the most he's played was 13 minutes last time out against Siena. But when he was playing, he was a legitimate option. He averages over 16 fantasy points per game. And, that's with 6 games or 5 games on the game log where he hasn't gotten above 10. So, when he got injured and then when he came back from injury. So I think he's a very legitimate option where I don't think you can guarantee that he's going to play a lot of minutes, but what if he does? Then he might have a chance to absolutely smash at a price tag of 3,400. Now, on the Marist side, this is a team that's really difficult to target. They rank 36th in the nation in bench minutes, meaning they play a lot of guys, and they play a lot of guys a lot of different minutes. In the first game against Fairfield, Jaden Collins was the best player in that game for Marist. He played with a 35% usage rate in that game, put up 33 fantasy points on 12 shots, 15, 5, and 7 was his overall stat line, and that's really solid. I do think he's probably their best player from looking at it from a statistical standpoint. But Max Allen is the guy who leads them in usage rate. The problem is that he does come off the bench, he does not come off the bench. He missed their last game, and so you don't really know if he's going to be back for this one. DraftKings does not have a Q tag or an out tag next to him, but he did not play in their most recent game, so keep that in mind. But he is a guy that, when he's out there, does get a ton of looks. Now, in their last game, their starting 5 was the aforementioned Jaden Collins, and then it was also Pasquarelli, Cooley, Doherty, and Price. Jackson Price was the big beneficiary of the Max Allen injury. He got to start and play 38 minutes, which is more than his normal load, and he only put up 20 fantasy points, but it's not terrible. And the fact that he's playing 38 minutes, if Max Allen was out again, I would feel pretty comfortable in him playing that amount of minutes per game. And Fairfield is a much better relative matchup for Marist. So, with Fairfield liking to push the tempo, I think the Jackson Price, if he gets that same minute load, could definitely pay off his price tag. But looking at his game log, he should not be priced this high. I think that's a recurring theme on this slate. If he were 5,200 instead of 6,200, I would consider him one of the easiest clicks on the slate as long as we have news about Max Allen. Now, Pasquarelli does have the highest shot rate of that starting 5 that Marist plays, and he's been kind of hit or miss, right? The last 5 games, he's had a 27 and a 23, and then kind of 3 duds. So he is a guy that, knowing he's going to be taking a lot of shots, you can get to. I don't think he's the best value play on the slate, but I do think he's an option. Now, off of the bench, Ferris and Brickner are going to play over 20 minutes. They tend to do that. They're not super high usage players. They're not super elite fantasy scores, but they are an option. And then Noah Harris is going to play a little bit as well at $3,600. I think he's a little bit underpriced, but he's not an elite option at the same time either. So I think he's a guy where if you're looking to punt, he's probably one of the better punt plays on this. Next up, we have a very key matchup in the A10. Dayton taking on Loyola. Both these teams are tied for second in the A10 right now. If you want to keep that double bye in the A10 tournament, you're probably going to want to win this game if you're on either side. Dayton still ranked in the AP Top 25. We've talked about them on numerous slates. I know this team very well because of, my dad is a Dayton alum, so I watch them a lot, root for them a lot, and I know the ins and outs of this team. And I think this is a matchup that sets up pretty well for them. So Dayton is taking on Loyola. They're heading to Loyola, and this game is projected to be 71-67 according to KenPom. These teams met twice last year. Dayton won the first meeting 85-81 at UD Arena, and then 65-49 in Chicago, where they just totally clamped down and it was a masterclass from the Dayton Bigs. And what I mean by that when I say Dayton Bigs is Portland Trailblazer Tumani Kamara was on this Dayton team last year, and he was their second best player behind Deron Holmes. The first matchup, Kamara absolutely demolished Loyola. The second matchup, it was Holmes that absolutely demolished Loyola. He had 20 and 10 in that second matchup, and I can absolutely see that happening again here in this one. Deron Holmes is Dayton's best player. He should be an All-American candidate. He's very good. He's going to play in the NBA. If you don't know the name, start learning the name because he's a guy that could be making a lot of noise later this month. Now, Holmes has a 31% usage rate on the season, which is the highest of anybody on this slate, and he's been a pretty consistent fantasy scorer as well. He's had 38 fantasy points in 4 straight games, and in conference play, he has had multiple games over 50 and a game over 60. So you know the ceiling is there. You know the usage is there. And I think he's just a really solid option. Another thing that's interesting as I started deep diving this Dayton team is he ranks 13th in the nation in fouls drawn per 40 minutes and ranks 3rd in the nation in free throws attempted behind only Zach Edey and Jaden Ledee. So this is a guy who is going to draw fouls, is going to get to the line. And the crappy part about that, though, is when he gets to the line a lot, it doesn't help out his teammates because they're not getting assists. It's slowing the pace of the game down. So I really think Deron Holmes, if you're playing this Dayton side and you like Deron Holmes, you can play him unstacked. Like this doesn't necessarily have the recipe for being an up and down game environment. Dayton plays at a very slow tempo. So I think if you want to play Deron Holmes, you can very well just play Deron Holmes on this Dayton side and hope that he's the only one that gets there. And if you look back at his game log, in the games where he does really get there, oftentimes he is the only one on the Dayton side that does get there. Now, for the rest of this Dayton team, Nate Santos is the guy where if you're looking to fade Holmes, he's the guy you want to have. He is typically the guy that when Deron Holmes is not playing his best, Nate Santos usually is the one getting more looks because he tends to be the beneficiary of added attention on Holmes, and he's a pretty good offensive player in his own right. He's had multiple games over 30 in conference play, and he generally takes about 9 to 12 shots per game, and multiple of them are usually behind the arc. Nate Santos can be paired with Holmes, but I think he's best used as a Holmes fade option. Now, Dayton's 4 guards are really where this gets a little frustrating. I think they're all 4 objectively overpriced on DraftKings. Let's go through them one by one. Javon Bennett is the point guard who has a very high assist rate, very high steal rate, but he doesn't score the basketball a whole lot, doesn't shoot the basketball a whole lot, which makes it really tough for him to hit 4x value for his salary of $6,300. He's only done it once in the last 6 games. Kobe Elvis is actually the second in usage guy on this Dayton team, but he's been struggling lately. Like he just hasn't looked good from my eye test. And since I've been watching them recently, in the last 5 games, he's not put up a game more than 20 fantasy points. However, the one game before that, St. Joe's, he had 39. So because he does get some legitimate usage and legitimate looks at shots, like he does have a chance to have a ceiling game, but I don't want to pay that much to try to get it. Enoch Cheeks is probably my favorite play of the 4 Dayton guards. He was a really high usage player at Robert Morris, averaged about 15, 5, and 3, I believe it was at Robert Morris. And in their last game against Davidson, he looked really good, 5 for 6 from the field, 29 fantasy points. He's a guy that can fill up a stat sheet in a variety of ways, and he's starting to kind of come out of his shell in terms of his shot rate in the last 2 weeks. That will allow him to really unlock his fantasy potential if he's able to actually get some shots off. Speaking of shots, Kobe Bryant is Dayton's best shooter, and in my opinion, he's one of the best three-point shooters in the nation. The numbers bear that out. He is one of the highest in the nation in three-point percentage. He was leading it 2 weeks ago. I don't believe he still is. But if he gets hot from behind the arc, that's a recipe for fantasy goodness. The only problem is he doesn't do a whole lot else outside of score. So what you would probably need for him to have a ceiling night is to get hot early to earn extra playing time down the road where he can get you extra rebounds and assists, and hopefully he can stay hot with his shooting and deliver a ceiling performance. Outside of those four guards, the only other guy that ever plays is Isaac Jack. He is their backup center, and they've actually played some lineups with Jack and Holmes on the floor together. I happen to like that look for them because Deron Holmes is probably going to be a 4 in the NBA. To me, like Santos, he would be a Holmes pivot option where if you think that Deron Holmes is not going to get there, play Isaac Jack. Maybe Deron Holmes gets in foul trouble and Isaac Jack sees north of 15 minutes. It's definitely a possibility. Now, on the Loyola side, they're an interesting team to target because their usage and their minutes do not align with each other. Philip Alston is their usage leader on the season, and he was also their leading scorer in both games against Dayton last year. He was kind of a hard matchup. It's kind of like a bigger wing for this Dayton team, and I think that might be the same case this year. But the problem is like he doesn't always play the most minutes. In 4 of his last 5 games, he has not eclipsed 27 minutes. And so it's kind of hard to, have a ceiling game when you're not playing that many minutes. And so maybe with this being a big game, with this being probably the most important game of the Ramblers season, do they play one of their best guys more minutes? You got to feel like they do. And so maybe that's a pathway to playing Alston is saying, hey, what if he plays at the same usage rate he's been at, but now all of a sudden he sees more minutes? I think there's definitely some untapped ceiling with Philip Alston, in my opinion. Now, after him, the two guys that do play all the minutes are Braden Norris and Des Watson. What's interesting is Braden Norris only has a 14% usage rate and a 13% shot rate on the season. That's not great. But what he does is he uses peripheral stats to put up fantasy points. He has really good really good rebound rates for a guard and a really high assist rate. He's one of the leading assist guys in the A10. And so if Loyola is going to score a lot of points, or if this game does in fact end up getting up and down, he's a really solid option because he's going to be out there on the floor and he's going to have plenty of opportunities to put the peripheral stats that he needs to have a good fantasy performance. He's not my favorite play, but I can definitely see an argument for making a game stacking lineup that has him. Des Watson is the guy that does get all the shots, though. He is second on the team in usage among the normal starters behind Philip Alston, plays with a 22% usage rate. He's hit 4x value in 5 of the last 8 games, and 2 of those games were 5x value performances. So I definitely think there's a little bit of upside in Des Watson. I think in terms of the Loyola guys, I would probably rank it Alston and then Watson in terms of me most likely to play them. Sheldon Edwards is the last guy that I want to mention. He's kind of a boomer bust guard who has moved into the starting lineup, but has really seen his minutes and his shots oscillate. But the ceiling is there. In 2 of his last 6 games, he's been over 32 fantasy points, one of which was a 50 spot against George Mason. So there is a legitimate ceiling for Sheldon Edwards, and I would not mind playing him, but just know there's very little safety. Like he's a very high risk, high reward type of guy at 4,200. Now, for the Loyola bigs, Dame Adelakun does play more of the minutes at the center spot, even though Rubin has been the one starting recently, and Welch is kind of the backup big as well. But look, I think these guys are just foul magnets for Deron Holmes. I don't really have a desire to play any of them. I think they're all 3 overpriced. Adelakun does have a legitimate ceiling, but he rates really highly in terms of fouls committed per 40 minutes, and I just have no faith that he's going to be able to stay on the court against Dayton in this Deron Holmes offense. All right, so that does it for the first 2 games. So let's go ahead and take a quick breather, and then let's talk about the nightcap. Quick reminder, there are a few places where you can get more information from me. First off, you can follow me on Twitter at Mike's Money Picks. I'm more than happy to answer any questions if you reach out to me on Twitter. I also tweet out any updates for the show as well, so feel free to reach out on there. Also, I'm in the Fantasy Corner Discord. The link is in the description on YouTube as well as on the audio feed. Fantasy Corner Discord's got a lot of smart people where we've had a lot of good conversation, a lot of good chatter going on in the college basketball channel where we've had a lot of people actually win a lot of money recently. And so basically we just got a lot of people bouncing ideas off each other, talking plays, talking strategy, and it's just a great environment to be in if you want to get better at college basketball DFS, if you want somebody to bounce ideas off of, or if you just want somebody to sweat it out with and enjoy watching the games with. It's your place to go. It's a great community to be a part of, and I cannot recommend it enough. Now, I also write an article for my Patreon every single college basketball slate. where I profile my core plays as well as kind of my lineup strategy and attack strategy for each slate. There's not a whole lot of people out there doing this for college basketball. So like I can't sit here and guarantee that you're just going to have like GPP winners in your inbox right away, but I can guarantee you can get some good sound information that you can use to, get some really good reads and good building blocks for your own process as you look to get better at college basketball DFS. Now, also, I'm not going to have a Saturday or a Sunday episode this week. I'm headed out of town this weekend. So basically, if you want my thoughts on the Saturday or the Sunday slate, I'm still going to have the articles for the Patreon, and I will be in the Fantasy Corner Discord chopping it up. So if you want to, get my thoughts, my plays on those are the places where you can go to get that. And I definitely do recommend that. And also make sure you're subscribed to the channel. That way you can be back with us when we're back for the Monday slate, as well as all the rest of college basketball season. And if you like what you're seeing here on Mike's Money Picks, please hit the like button if you're watching on YouTube, and rate and review if you're listening on audio. I promise those do not fall on deaf ears. I really do appreciate them. They help the videos and the podcast get noticed, and it helps me out a ton. You guys are the absolute best. All right, so game number 3 on the night is the first tilt in the Mountain West. This one is between Fresno State and Nevada. KenPom has this one projected to be 78-62 in favor of Nevada. This is a rematch of a game earlier in the season where Nevada won 72-57. So with that being a 15-point margin and this one projected to be a 16-point margin, I definitely think there's some blowout potential here. And Fresno, looking at it, they are really thin, and they were really thin in that first meeting. They actually only played 6 players double-digit minutes in that first meeting against Nevada. Now, their best player in that game was Isaiah Pope. He ended with a stat line of 18, 4, and 2 for 27 fantasy points. Played 36 minutes, took 9 shots, and he has been one of the more consistent fantasy options for this Fresno team. He's taken double-digit shots in 3 straight games. We know he had the success against Nevada the first time. I think he's a great play at 5,400 personally. Isaiah Hill is their usage leader on the season. Do not get the two Isaiahs twisted. He generally gets more shots than the other Isaiah. He generally has more usage than the other Isaiah. He was not as effective against Nevada as Isaiah Pope, though. He was 2 for 11 from the field and put up 24 fantasy points thanks to getting 6 rebounds and 7 assists. So he can get there with peripherals in addition to his scoring. I don't think he's a bad option at 7,400. I think he's priced at a point where I would rather really pay up to the top options on the slate or pay down to the low options on the slate. I don't think he's going to be a super popular play at 7,400, but I do think he could be sneaky value. This Fresno team's been kind of taking their lumps in the Mountain West recently, but Hill and Pope have still played a ton of minutes no matter what the game flow has looked like. Now, after those two, they have had multiple injuries to their big men. I mean, as you look at their lineup on DraftKings, just look at all the Q tags and the out tags that they've got, right? Bokier is their starting center who could be back. No one really knows what the deal is, and you can't really find anything on the internet unless you want to pay for a premium site. So I don't expect him to be back, but it wouldn't shock me if he was back. What they've been doing, though, is they've been playing Leo Colmerio at the 5, and that has led to big-time minutes for Colmerio, and it's led to 2 big-time fantasy performances. You can kind of see the exact mark in his game log where he started playing the 5. It was 4 games ago. He's played over 31 minutes in all 4 of those games. Now, the fantasy scoring has been boom or bust. He's been over 32 fantasy points twice and under 15 fantasy points twice. So, which one are you going to get? I don't know, but there is a legitimate ceiling there, and if Bokier is out, you know he's going to play a ton of minutes. We've also seen Jalen Weaver, inserted into the starting lineup recently, especially with all those injuries, and he's a guy that the fantasy outputs have not been terrible, but generally, I would just rather pay for Isaiah Pope at $200 more salary. That's just my personal opinion. And that kind of does it for the Fresno side, y'all. They don't play a whole lot of guys. They're not very deep. They don't really score a whole lot of points. It's not the best team to target, in my opinion. Now, on the Nevada side, they are really interesting because in the first meeting, Keenan Blackshear absolutely dominated. He was Nevada's leader in points, rebounds, and assists in that first meeting against Fresno. Played 34 minutes, 6 for 13 shooting, 42 fantasy points on 18, 7, and 4. That's really good. But here's the bad news. He did not play in Nevada's last game against Colorado State. He was seen in a walking boot nursing an ankle injury. And y'all, I've had my fair share of ankle injuries in the day. Back playing high school football, I dealt with them quite a lot. And it's very tough to go from a walking boot to playing 30 plus minutes in a basketball game in 2 days. So I don't think it's super duper likely that he plays. It wouldn't surprise me. Nothing in college basketball surprises me anymore with guys playing and not playing. If you played tonight's slate and you follow the Ohio State guys, it really looked like Jamison Battle was not going to play for all week. And then Bruce Thornton all of a sudden is a surprise scratch. You never really know what's going to happen in college basketball, but I digress. Keenan Blackshear, he's a great option if he suits up. If he does not suit up, I think that opens up a ton of value. And the first guy that is kind of a value play is Jared Lucas. He is their leading scorer on the season. I've kind of made fun of him all season long because he is super scoring dependent. I mean, he's a good scorer, but he's very scoring dependent for fantasy points. And that picked up a little bit in their game against Colorado State where Blackshear missed. Lucas was 6 for 18 from the field, which is a high for him shooting in this calendar year. And he put up 7 boards and 3 assists. So he did get a little more peripheral stats than you're used to out of him en route to a 39 fantasy point performance. If Blackshear is out, I think you can really easily fire him up. And if you want to play Blackshear, I would have no problem putting Blackshear into my lineup and then late swapping down to Lucas. I don't think that's a bad strategy at all. Now, Blackshear being out also opened up a little bit of value. Hunter McIntosh moved into the starting lineup. He was 3,900 on the slate Tuesday night. Now he is 4,600, and it was well earned. He played 31 minutes, took 11 shots, put up 21 fantasy points. Back-to-back games now, he's been over 21 fantasy points. He also tends to play a lot in blowouts, which this game could very well turn into. Hunter McIntosh is one of my favorite value plays on the slate if we get news that Keenan Blackshear is out. Daniel Foster also saw boosted minutes without Blackshear in the lineup. He played 27 minutes against Colorado State, put up 26 fantasy points. Like McIntosh, he's another guy who will see run in a blowout situation, and so I don't mind him at 5,000, but I would rather just pay down to McIntosh at 4,600. Tyler Rollison is interesting. I played him on the Tuesday night slate against Colorado State because I thought he was going to be the one that was the biggest beneficiary of the Blackshear injury. It was Hunter McIntosh instead, but he's a guy that will play in a blowout, and he does play minutes at the point guard position. So, at $4,100, if everybody's going to McIntosh, what if it's Rollison for a night? I think he's a very interesting GPP value play. Now, after those guys, their big men are going in opposite directions. Nick Davidson was just really, really good for like the middle of the month of February. I guess dating back to the start of February, he was just an elite option. But his shots are going in the wrong direction, and the percentage of him making them has been kind of steady, but he's been taking less of them. On the other hand, though, Trey Coleman has been taking more and more shots. In the last 3 games, Trey Coleman has either tied or beaten Nick Davidson in shots, and the fantasy scoring has somewhat reflected that. Trey Coleman in his last 3 games, 37, 38, and 28, whereas Nick Davidson has not quite been as consistent. He's had 23, 42, and 22. So, do both of these guys have a legitimately high ceiling? Yes. Would I be likely to play both these guys together? No. I would very likely just try to pick one between Davidson and Coleman and hope that that's the one that ends up getting their lion's share of the shots. And if they both get there, then I've got one of the guys that gets there, right? I have no problem doing that. I don't think it would be very wise to put $15,000 of your salary into both Nevada big men. All right, that does it for the Nevada side. Let's go ahead and move on to the last game of the night, which is Air Force taking on Utah State. KenPom has this one projected to be 79-62 in favor of Utah State, which ironically makes it the highest game total of the slate. Utah State with the highest team total of the slate. Air Force tied for the lowest team total of the slate with Fresno State. It's a weird slate, y'all, and this one has some serious blowout potential. In the first meeting, it was 88-60 in favor of Utah State, so there's nothing that would make me think in between now and then that this game is going to be much closer than that one. So it might not end up being 28, but it could definitely end up being a blowout. Raitis Petritis is Air Force's best player and usage leader on the season, and he had a 35% usage rate in that game against Utah State. He played 25 minutes off the bench. I don't know why he came off the bench. It appears that he missed a game for injury and then was his first game back. That's what I would assume. I couldn't find anything on the internet that supported that, but he did have 27 fantasy points in 25 minutes. That's not bad. Air Force has been getting blown out a lot in the Mountain West, and he still plays a ton no matter what. Played 39 minutes against Boise, and they only scored 48 points. So definitely a guy that you can get into your lineups regardless of game flow. Do not let the blowout scare you with Raitis Petritis. Now, second and third, on this Air Force team in usage are Ethan Taylor and Bo Becker. I don't think they're bad options at all, just because they're going to play a ton of minutes. They're the only two other starters on this team with above a 16% usage rate also. Ethan Taylor in the first game against Utah State put up 27 fantasy points on only 8 shots to get there, and he averages more than 8 shots per game. So I don't think he's a bad option at all at 6,600. I think he, in terms of the mid-range guards, I think he's one of the best options. Now, Bo Becker was not as successful in that first game against Utah State, dealt with foul trouble, played 19 minutes, put up 7 fantasy points. But he's a guy that has shown a legitimate ceiling recently. 2 of his last 5 games have been over 29 fantasy points. However, he has had 2 that are 16 fantasy points or fewer with a negative fantasy point outing against Boise State. So not a super consistent guy, but if you're looking to bet on anyone on this Air Force team, I'd probably keep it to those big 3 guys. Now, after that, Boylan and Brown, that is Kellen Boylan and Byron Brown, are the other 2 starters, and they occasionally have these random big games out of nowhere. I don't think they're terrible options, but there's not really a whole lot of consistency to what they do. They don't have a whole very consistent usage rate. Like, I think you can play them, but I think they're GPP plays, and I'd probably play them as one-off plays if I was doing that. Now, the Utah State side is really interesting. So, Gray Osabor is their best player, and he was the best player for them in that first game against Air Force. We got a Gray Osabor ceiling game in that game with 51 fantasy points, 32, 9, and 4 on 11 for 14 from the field. That is really efficient. Now, what's interesting is in that game, they played Gray Osabor at the small ball 5. Last game they played, they switched up their starting lineup back to the lineup where Gray Osabor was playing the small ball 5. And in that game against Fresno, he played 41 minutes and put up 44 fantasy points. So the small ball 5 appears to be a very profitable role for Gray Osabor. And if they're going to continue starting their lineup in that way, I think he's a great play. Now, with this pricing on this slate being what it is, I think the question is going to be Holmes, Osabor, or fade both of them. And I'm here to tell you, I think I might play a few lineups with both of them. They both have by far the highest ceiling on the slate. They both have a pretty solid floor as well. And I think there's enough 4 and 5K dart throws that you can make that maybe you catch a few guys who have ceiling nights. You get a few value plays who get you just 3 to 4X. And I think you can build off of the 2 kings on the slate, Osabor and Holmes. I think that's a very valid strategy in my opinion. I will definitely be playing lineups with Holmes. I will definitely be playing lineups with Osabor. I will definitely be playing lineups with both. And I might play a lineup or 2 with neither, even though I do like them both quite a lot. Now, what's interesting is Air Force does not start a guy over 6'7". So Utah State's normal big man, Isaac Johnson, is a big fella. But, they went to that small ball lineup against Air Force the first time, and he only played 1 minute. And then they went to the small ball lineup last game against Fresno, and Johnson only played 10 minutes. It's a situation where if Johnson was out there on the floor, I feel like he could use his size to take advantage of this matchup. But I can't guarantee that he's going to be out there on the floor, and so I think he's a very risky play at 4,900. Now, what's also interesting is with Utah State playing the small ball lineup, Darius Brown took on a much bigger rebounding role, which actually turned into more assists as well because he was getting some outlet passes. And so he put up 41 fantasy points in that matchup against Fresno at a salary of $8,200. I don't think it's a bad option, and I think the evidence shows that you can play Osabor and Brown together. Now, the other starters for Utah State are Martinez, Falslev, and Uduje. And I got to be honest, Martinez and Falslev are just these guys that there's not really a whole lot of consistency. The only thing that is consistent is their minutes. Like, they're going to be out there on the floor. They're going to be having opportunities to put up fantasy points. Where they actually put up fantasy points is just not really something that you can consistently count on. And I feel like that's something I've said a lot about, like, this high 5 to 6K guard range on this slate. And I kind of think with the way the slate is priced out, I kind of think you can just avoid that range altogether. If I were to play one of them on the Utah State side, it would be just that. It would probably be one of them, and it probably would not be with Brown in hopes that Martinez or Falslev just kind of, cannibalizes Brown's fantasy points. Uduje is interesting because he's not priced for his role. He did move into the starting lineup when they went to this small ball lineup, played 42 minutes against Fresno, put up 21 fantasy points. I think if he's going to continue to play that minute load, he's a really solid option at $4,800. And then Khalifa Sacco is a guy that plays a little bit of minutes as a backup big, but they kind of made Isaac Johnson the backup big, which reduced Sacco's minutes, so I don't think he's a guy you can play with a whole lot of confidence either. All right, so that does it for the Friday night, March 1st slate. March has arrived, y'all. We are closing in on conference tournament and NCAA tournament season, and I could not be more excited. So let's kick off March the right way, and let's have a winning Friday slate. Now, if you like what you saw in this video, please hit the like button. Please subscribe to the channel. If you like what you're listening to on audio, rate and review, subscribe to the audio feed as well. Helps me out a ton when you guys do that. Shows me a ton of support, and I do appreciate it. Reminder, if you do want more from me, follow me on Twitter at Mike's Money Picks, join the Fantasy Corner Discord, and go join the Patreon to get you those articles for a little bit of a very reasonable fee. Now, that pretty much does it for this episode, guys. So remember, I won't be here all weekend, but if you're subscribed, you will know when we come back next week, and I'm very excited to look into, the first week of March. We're getting into crunch time of the season, so make sure you're subscribed so you can be back with us then. Other than that, y'all, best of luck to you on the Friday slate. Best of luck to all your DFS endeavors over the whole weekend. Thank you guys for watching and listening to this point, and I will see you next time.